Caprica, TV series review. So this is part of what I've been calling my television addiction series, which is where I go back through all the TV shows I watched from 2011 to 2012 when I was living in Cambodia and was watching way too much TV, partly because of all the access I had to the cheap pirated DVDs which were being sold there at the time. For more information on what this series is and why I've decided to waste my time doing it, you can look at the video in the link in the description down below in which I explain more about it. But right, Caprica. So if you're not familiar with Caprica, Caprica is a prequel series to Battlestar Galactica. It was supposed to be a whole series, but it got canceled after only one season because of low ratings. But it still has the one season complete. And yeah, it's meant to be it is a prequel to Battlestar Galactica. So I suppose I should talk about Battlestar Galactica first. Yeah, confession to make here. I actually never watched the whole series of Battlestar Galactica. It looked really interesting. Now, of course, I was in Japan. I've been living abroad for a long time, so I was in Japan when it first came out in 2004, and initially didn't hear about it at all, but a friend introduced it to me. One of my trips back to the U.S. I want to say maybe it was back in 2006, maybe, or maybe it was, I don't remember. It was one of my trips back to the U.S. Meeting up with an old college friend, and he's like, "Oh, you guys have to see this, Battlestar Galactica," and he put on the episode, and I was vaguely aware of the old TV series Battlestar Galactica. It was before my time. It came out in, I think, 1978 and 1979, which was right about the time I was born. And I have this little theory that people are least aware of the pop culture that happens right when they were born. For you know, like things that happened 10 years before I was born, or 15 or 20 years before I was born, I was aware of that when I was growing up because it was old enough that people older than me were feeling nostalgic for it. So, you know, like all the songs from the 50s and 60s and all the pop culture from the 50s and 60s was kind of getting revived in the 1980s through reruns and oldies and all that kind of stuff. But the stuff that happened right around the time you were born, of course, was too new to be revived. So there were no Battlestar Galactica reruns on TV when I was a kid in the 1980s. Or at least that was my experience. Sometimes I have to be careful overgeneralizing my own experience to all people my age. I mean, let me know in the comments what your experience was with Battlestar Galactica, the original show. The first time I ever remember even hearing about the show was in high school. My religion teacher was talking about it, and he was talking about how, you know, when Star Wars came out, a lot of Christians didn't like Star Wars or were nervous about Star Wars because the Force, the mythology behind Star Wars, which is a fictional mythology, but nonetheless, would seem to be heavily influenced by Hinduism or by New Age ideas or by kind of non-Christian ideas of spirituality. So he said that Battlestar Galactica was made in response to that as the Christian version of it. I actually don't know how much truth there is in that. Looking at Wikipedia said that I guess it had a lot of Christian symbols in there because the writer was a Mormon, a Church of Latter-day Saints. But regardless, it did have a lot of religious imagery, Christian or Mormon imagery in it that people must have noticed at the time and maybe interpreted whatever they wanted to interpret on there, whether it was just symbolism or whether it was an overt Christian message. Excuse me, So I was vaguely familiar with Battlestar Galactica from that. I knew it was some sort of space battle. It had more Christian imagery than Star Wars. It had been briefly on TV in the late 70s. And never really thought it was anything anyone would bother reviving, because it had the impression that it wasn't all that great of a show, though again I've never even seen any of the episodes. But I don't think it certainly didn't seem to have any cult following when I was young. No intellectual property that I ever dreamed anyone would want to revise. But yeah, they did. My friend showed the first episode to us. Now, I still remember this. My friend didn't tell us, there was a couple of us there, that the first episode was 3 hours long. Because the first episode was released as like a mini-series on the Sci-Fi Channel. And it was like two parts of a mini-series, which when you combine together, it makes up for 3 hours of viewing or something. So I was expecting just an hour. And was somewhat, like a 3-hour movie is okay if somebody tells you that's what you're in for. If you think you're just going to watch 1 hour of television, and I wasn't looking at my watch or anything, but I remember feeling at the end of it like, wow, that was a long time. I don't remember signing up for like this 3-hour thing, but I was totally interested in it while I was watching it, and to a certain extent didn't quite notice it had gone on for 3 hours because I wasn't looking at my watch. I knew it was longer than an hour. But I thought maybe it had been 2 hours or something. But yeah, I was completely interested in it. It looked like a really interesting premise. The characters seemed really interesting. The idea of an ongoing story, like, okay, this is the story arc and this is going to develop as the series goes, was pretty interesting still in 2004. I mean, I don't want to say it was a completely new thing, because it goes back quite a ways. The idea of ongoing stories, goes back to soap operas and stuff like that. But it was really before the idea of serialized shows really took off. So that aspect intrigued me. But I didn't get a chance to watch it because I was going back to Japan until a few years later. Battlestar Galactica actually started getting popular in Japan, and it was hitting the Japanese DVD stores around 2008, I want to say. So by 2008, you could go to these DVD stores in Japan, and you could rent episodes of Battlestar Galactica, and I thought, oh, great. So I started renting some of them and rewatched that first initial miniseries just to remind myself of who all the characters were and stuff like that. And started working my way through the first season and into the second season, and found that I was getting bored. And apologies to the fans of this show. I don't know quite what was wrong with me, because it was a well-done show. It was interesting. The characters seemed interesting. And I've definitely watched a lot more boring stuff in my life. Part of me wants to say it was slower paced than I was expecting. And it was slower paced than I was expecting. It was a serialized show, but it wasn't quite a serialized show as we know it today, where like each episode advances the story. Instead, each episode kind of did a very little to advance the story. I think it was serialized TV shows when serialized TV was still in its infancy, and they didn't quite want to commit to doing the whole story arc thing. In fact, I was reading on Wikipedia just before filming this video. Apparently, Ronald D. Moore, the head writer and producer of the show, was battling the network on this. The network was worried that a serialized show would make it hard for new viewers to enter the show, which is the way networks thought back in 2004 before serialized TV took off. So there was more standalone episodes mixed in with that. And I found myself getting a little bit bored with the series. Found myself only half watching it. Also, and this is a bit embarrassing to admit, but at the time, I was watching this in the evenings after work, where I would feel completely drained after a day of teaching. Those of you who are teachers will know the feeling. And was having some beers to relax, or to try to relax while I watched the TV show. Now, alcohol does not mix well with me, because it just, not because I've got a tendency to get addicted to it, and quite the opposite. I've got this personality where it just makes me very sleepy very quickly and causes me to lose focus. It's funny the way alcohol affects different people differently. For some people, it really fuels them, and it causes them to become very energetic and very social. For me, I can never drink alcohol at parties because it causes me to become less social and just sleepy and tired. And I was going through this phase at that time where I had this idea that this would just kind of relax me. And it did relax me to a certain extent, maybe the first beer, but by the second beer I was already getting sleepy. And so as a result, I was watching this series, but there were stretches where I was not really paying close attention to what was going on. And then somewhere in the middle of the second series, I just gave up and stopped watching. So the position I find myself in is that I know this is a great series. I know a number of people have really recommended it to me. I did kind of like what I saw, even though I got a little bit bored with it. I largely attribute that to my own lack of focus and the fact that I wasn't mentally prepared for the pace that the show wanted to move at. And have somewhat, to this day, somewhat regretted not sticking with the series. Although, I don't know, those of you who stuck with the series all the way through, let me know what you thought about it, because I have heard mixed reviews of it, the later seasons. Apparently there was like a time jump at one point where the show jumped forward in time because there was some sort of plot element that couldn't be resolved. And a lot of people felt that that was the jump the shark moment on the show, and that the last few seasons weren't worth watching, or the last couple seasons. I don't know. Let me know what you thought. Like I said, I never made it that far myself. But I'm in the DVD store, and I see the Battlestar Galactica stuff, and I think to myself, geez, I really should watch this, but what am I going to do? Should I start back at the beginning and work my way through those seasons I only half watched? On the other hand, I did half watch them, so it's not, I already know sort of what's happened. It's going to be a little bit boring to rewatch those first couple seasons. And then I saw Caprica. And Caprica was a completely new show based on the Battlestar Galactica, and it was a prequel. So if I didn't know the Battlestar Galactica continuity, if I didn't know how the third, fourth, and fifth seasons ended up, it didn't matter, because this show took place in time before the Battlestar Galactica. So I decided to check this show out instead. Now, Caprica was not as well received as Battlestar Galactica. I guess it didn't get the ratings, so the Sci-Fi Channel pulled the plug on it early on. I guess the Battlestar Galactica fans must not have all come over to Caprica. I found it completely watchable, though. It's got a lot of very interesting ideas, and it's got a number of different plot threads going on at once. It's got kind of plot threads about religious dogmatism and religious extremism and terrorism connected to religion, and virtual reality, and it's got this whole crime, like the Godfather family type subplot going on, and talking about artificial intelligence and how that's developing, and this virtual world, and there's just a lot of interesting stuff going on. It doesn't come together completely perfectly, by which I mean there are some, in my opinion, there are some plot holes going on, and there are some leaps of logic going on, where there's a few kind of things that don't seem like they completely make sense story-wise. But it definitely held my attention while I was watching it. The only thing, and this is going to be a minor spoiler, but it's not really a spoiler because this is kind of the premise. This is the first episode. The whole premise of the show is that there's this scientist guy whose daughter is killed in a terrorist attack right in the first episode. And she had some connections to the terrorists, and that's kind of, that comes out later in the, well, that's established right from episode 1, but then those threads are continued later in the series. So he's trying to recover his daughter's consciousness, where there's like this virtual version of her conscious which is uploaded into a computer-type system. And that is kind of a downer note to start your series on. I mean, to a certain extent, tragedy does grip people. So it's a hook at the same time. This is a great tragedy that you're going to see how this man works through it. But it also, I don't know. I felt like I was trying to use this series as escapist entertainment. And I thought it was a little bit heavy, that the main plot was this man trying to recover what he could of his daughter's consciousness after his daughter had been killed in this terrorist attack. So I felt like I felt way too sorry for the scientist, and felt like it would have been way too devastating to the story if he wasn't able to recover his daughter's consciousness from that electronic system. And so that was, I don't know. Be curious to hear if any other people felt the same way. Do you suppose that maybe had an effect on people, and that's why this show didn't take off in ratings, is because that was such a downer premise to get people on board with? I mean, I don't know. But aside from that, there's just a lot of really imaginative stuff in here and a lot of world building, and it's a lot of, the whole reason you would want to get invested in a science fiction show to begin with is because of all these kind of fantastical elements in the world building and the different factions. And I thought it was completely watchable. Somebody who knows Battlestar Galactica better than me will have to give a review of how well it ties in to all the threads in Battlestar Galactica, etc. But just as a one season show, I thought it was completely watchable.